The winter of 1883 came to the Cumberland Gap with a cruelty that seemed almost personal. Snow had fallen for 3 days straight, blanketing the Tennessee mountains in white silence. And when it finally stopped, the cold that followed was the kind that crept into bones and stayed there. It was the kind of cold that made men question their choices, that made animals burrow deep into the earth, that made survival itself feel like a daily battle against nature's indifference. But what happened to Eliza May Hartwell on that frozen mountaintop had nothing to do with nature. It was cruelty of a different kind, the human kind. The overturned wagon sat beneath a skeletal juniper tree, its rear wheel shattered beyond repair. The canvas covering hung limp and useless, offering no protection against the wind that howled through the mountain passes like the voice of something ancient and hungry. Inside, barely visible in the dying light of a small fire, a young woman lay curled on her side, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Her belly was swollen with children, actually. Twins that she could feel moving inside her, restless and unknowing of the fate that awaited them. Eliza was 19 years old. She had blonde hair that had once been carefully pinned and styled, now hanging in tangled strands around a face pale as milk. Her blue eyes, wide with pain and fear, stared at the flames that were slowly consuming the last of the wood she had managed to gather. When that fire died, she knew the cold would take her. And the babies, all 3 of them would freeze on this God-forsaken mountain, and no one would find them until spring, if anyone bothered to look at all. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hands, once soft from a life of relative comfort, were now raw and torn from 3 days of trying to repair that wagon wheel with nothing but desperation and will. She had no tools, no supplies. The men who had brought her here had made sure of that. They had left her 1 canteen of water and nothing else, not even a blanket thick enough to matter. The contractions had started that morning, gentle at first, like the distant rumble of thunder over the mountains. But as the sun climbed higher and then began its descent, the pain had grown sharper, more insistent, until it felt like her body was trying to tear itself in half. She had helped birth calves back on her father's farm in Pennsylvania, had watched her mother assist with human births in their small community. But nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing could prepare you for bringing life into the world while death waited just outside the circle of firelight. But to understand how Eliza May Hartwell came to be alone on that mountain, we need to go back 48 hours, to the moment when her world ended for the second time in 4 months. The Hartwell estate stood on the outskirts of Knoxville, like a monument to one man's ambition. Silas Hartwell had built his fortune on coal, on the black gold that lay beneath the Tennessee earth, and he had built it through methods that were efficient, if not exactly legal. He was 62 years old, with hair gone white as snow and eyes the color of winter ice. Those who worked for him feared him. Those who opposed him usually didn't oppose him for long. Eliza had been standing in the main parlor of that house, her hands clasped over her swollen belly, when Silas delivered his verdict. The old man sat in his leather chair by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his other hand drumming slowly on the armrest. Behind him, his foreman, Garrett Knox, stood like a sentinel, silent and watching. Garrett was 35, with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that held no warmth, no pity, nothing but cold calculation. 2 children, Silas had said, his voice flat and emotionless. Twins, that's what the midwife told me. Eliza had nodded, unable to speak. She knew what was coming, had known since Daniel died, since her husband, Silas's only remaining son, had taken that convenient fall from his horse 4 months earlier. An accident, they called it. But Eliza knew better. She had found the letter Daniel had hidden in their Bible, the letter that explained everything, the letter she was too terrified to show anyone. "The Hartwell line cannot be divided," Silas continued, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "One heir, strong and undisputed. That's how empires survive. 2 children split the inheritance, create conflict, weakness." "They're Daniel's sons," Eliza had whispered, finding her voice at last. "Your grandchildren, your blood." Silas had looked at her then, and the coldness in his gaze made her step back involuntarily. "Daniel is dead. His weakness killed him. I will not allow that weakness to infect the next generation." He stood, setting down his glass with careful precision. "You were a mistake from the beginning. Pennsylvania farm stock, no breeding, no connections. Daniel married you out of some foolish notion of love." The word dripped with contempt. "I tolerated it because he was my son. But he's gone now, and you are no longer a Hartwell." "Please," Eliza had begged, hating the sound of her own desperation. "I have nowhere to go, no money. The babies—" "Should have been one strong boy," Silas interrupted. "Not 2, not complications. Garrett, take her." And just like that, her fate was sealed. Garrett Knox had gripped her arm, not roughly, but firmly. The grip of a man who did what he was told efficiently and without question. Another man, Pike Morrison, a red-haired brute with hands like ham hocks, had appeared to take her other arm. They had walked her out of that house, while Silas Hartwell turned back to his whiskey and his fire, already forgetting her. They had put her in a wagon, given her that single canteen of water, and then they had driven for 2 days, deeper and deeper into the mountains, far beyond any landmark she recognized. When the wheel finally broke, snapping with a sound like a gunshot in the frozen air, they had stopped. "Mr. Hartwell sends his regrets," Garrett had said, his face expressionless. "But the Hartwell line doesn't need twins, especially if they turn out to be girls." And then they had ridden away, leaving her with a broken wagon, 1 canteen of water, and the certainty of death. Now, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eliza felt another contraction grip her body. This one was different, stronger, more urgent. She knew what it meant. The babies were coming, whether she was ready or not, whether she was safe or not. Life didn't wait for convenient circumstances. She forced herself to move, to gather the few things she had. Clean cloths torn from her petticoat, the last of her water, a knife she had kept hidden in her boot, the only thing the men had missed when they searched her belongings. She arranged them in the shelter of the wagon, creating a small nest of blankets. Her hands shook, but she made them work, made them obey. The pain came in waves now, relentless and consuming. She positioned herself as best she could, remembering the instructions the midwife back home had given to expectant mothers. But those instructions had assumed warmth, safety, help. Not this frozen mountain, not this desperate solitude. "Please," she whispered to whatever might be listening, to God, to the mountain, to the universe itself. "If I die here, save my children. Send someone, anyone." The mountain offered no answer, only the distant cry of a hawk riding the wind currents, and the sound of wolves beginning their nightly hunt somewhere in the valleys below. The first baby came as the sun touched the edge of the western peaks, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold and crimson. His cry was strong, despite the circumstances, a thin wail that seemed impossibly loud in the vast silence. Eliza cleaned him with trembling hands, her own tears mixing with the melted snow she used to wash him. She wrapped him in cloth torn from her dress and placed him in the makeshift nest, tucking him close to what remained of the fire. "Henry," she whispered, naming him after her father. A good Pennsylvania name, a name that spoke of strength and endurance. The second boy came harder. The passage tore her, and she felt hot blood pooling beneath her, more than there should be, much more. She knew what it meant, had seen it once when a neighbor's wife died in childbirth. But she forced the knowledge away, focused only on the baby in her hands. He was smaller than his brother, more delicate, and his cry was weaker. But it was there. Life, demanding to be heard. James, she named him, after Daniel's middle name, a tenuous connection to the father these boys would never know. Eliza lay back, the twins nestled against her chest, too exhausted to move further. The blood continued to flow, and she could feel her strength ebbing with it. The fire was down to embers now. Another hour, maybe less, and it would be gone. The cold would come then, the killing cold of a mountain winter night. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue. Beautiful, she thought distantly. She had never seen stars so bright, so many of them, like diamonds scattered across velvet. Was this the last thing she would see? This frozen beauty? Then she heard it, the sound of hooves on stone, slow, careful, picking a path across the broken ground. Fear surged through her exhausted body, giving her a final burst of strength. She clutched her sons closer. Had Garrett and Pike returned to finish what they started? Or was this something worse? A stranger who might see a woman alone as an opportunity. The rider appeared as a silhouette against the dying light, tall and straight in the saddle. As he drew nearer, she could make out more details. Long, dark hair hanging past his shoulders. Broad shoulders wrapped in a fringed buckskin shirt. A rifle across his saddle, though his hands didn't move toward it. And his face, weathered and strong, with eyes that took in everything, missing nothing. A Cherokee, one of the mountain people. Eliza had heard stories about the Cherokee, none of them particularly comforting to a white woman alone in the wilderness. But she was too weak to run, too weak even to scream. All she could do was hold her babies and wait. The man dismounted with careful, unhurried movements. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty. When he spoke, his voice was deep and measured, carrying a hint of an accent, but clear English nevertheless. "You are hurt." Not a question, a statement of fact. Eliza tried to laugh, but it came out as a broken sound, edged with hysteria. "Yes, I am hurt." He came closer, and she could see his face more clearly now. Younger than she had first thought, perhaps 28 or 29. Strong features, a jaw darkened with stubble that spoke of days in the wilderness, and eyes that held neither hostility nor pity, just careful assessment. "Babies," he said, nodding toward the twins. "New." "Yes," Eliza managed, clutching them tighter. "My sons." He knelt a few feet away, maintaining that respectful distance. "I'm Caleb," he said, touching his chest. Then he looked around at the broken wagon, the dying fire, the blood-stained snow. "Who leaves woman with new babies here?" The question held no judgment, only practical curiosity, as if he genuinely wanted to understand the circumstances that led to this. "My husband's family," Eliza answered, the words bitter on her tongue. They didn't want—" She couldn't finish. The tears came then, making dusty tracks down her cheeks. Caleb nodded as if this explained everything. "White men do this," he said simply. "Leave what they think has no value." He stood and walked to his horse, returning with a water skin. He offered it to her without a word. Eliza hesitated only briefly before accepting. The water was cool and sweet on her parched lips. She wanted to gulp it down, but forced herself to drink slowly, knowing too much would make her sick. "Thank you," she said, offering the skin back. Caleb shook his head. "Keep." Then, after a pause, "Night comes. Cold soon. You cannot stay." Fear gripped her heart. "I can't travel. The birth. I know." He glanced at the blood-soaked ground, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. "You bleed too much. But this is not safe place. Coyotes come. Maybe mountain lions. Maybe men who left you return to make sure." Eliza knew he was right. Already the temperature was dropping, the frozen mountainside surrendering its scant warmth to the night sky with alarming speed. The twins would not survive the cold, and she was too weak to maintain a fire through the night, even if she had wood, which she didn't. "What choice do I have?" she asked, defeat heavy in her voice. Caleb considered her question seriously. "I take you to my people," he said finally. "Medicine woman there. She help." "Your people," Eliza thought. "The Cherokee, the ones the government was trying to force onto reservations. The ones whose land men like Silas Hartwell wanted to steal for the coal beneath it." "They won't want me," she said quietly. "Some will not," he agreed with surprising candor. "But Nona, the medicine woman, she takes in what others cast away. She will help." "Why?" Eliza asked, the question barely audible. "Why would you help me?" Caleb was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the twin boys and back again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, edged with old pain, carefully contained. "Many moons ago, white soldiers killed my wife," he said. "She carried our child." His expression remained stoic, but something flickered in his eyes, an old wound that had never properly healed. "No one helped her. I could not reach her in time." He straightened, decision made. "I will not leave another to die when I can help. It is not our way." Eliza felt tears threatening again, this time from gratitude so profound it had no words. She had been prepared to die in this barren place, her only hope that someone might find her sons before it was too late. Now this man, this stranger whose people had every reason to hate hers, was offering salvation. Caleb moved with efficient purpose. He gathered her blankets and created a carrier from his own coat, a cleverly designed sling that would hold both infants securely against his chest. His movements were slow, careful, and despite his size and obvious strength, his touch was gentle. "You ride," he explained, indicating his horse. "I walk. Baby's here." He patted the sling. "But," Eliza began to protest. "You too weak to hold them," he said matter-of-factly. "You fall, they die. Better this way." There was no arguing with his logic. With his help, Eliza managed to stand, swaying with weakness. The world spun alarmingly, and she would have fallen if Caleb's strong hand hadn't caught her elbow. "Blood loss makes head light," he observed. "Must go slow." Getting her onto the horse was a painful ordeal that left Eliza gasping and close to fainting. But Caleb was patient, supporting her weight until she was settled. Then he transferred the twins to the sling, where they nestled against his broad chest, surprisingly quiet in their new position. As they prepared to leave, Eliza looked back at the wagon one last time. It was the last tangible connection to her life with Daniel, to the world she had known.
There was nothing worth saving there, nothing worth remembering except the bitterness of betrayal. "My husband wasn't like his father," she said suddenly, needing this stranger to understand. "He wouldn't have done this." Caleb paused, considering her words. "Perhaps," he said finally, "but he left you among wolves."
With that he began walking, leading the horse at a careful pace across the darkening mountain. Eliza clung to the saddle, fighting to stay conscious as they traveled. She watched Caleb's back, straight and strong despite the burden he carried. Occasionally he would murmur to the twins in his native tongue, soft words that seemed to soothe them when they grew restless. They walked for what seemed like hours, the moon rising to light their path across the mountain wilderness. Eliza drifted in and out of awareness, her thoughts fragmented by pain and exhaustion. Once she thought she heard singing, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to blend with the night sounds around them. "What is that song?" she asked, her voice thin in the vastness. Caleb glanced back at her. "Prayer for safe journey," he replied. "For you, for small ones." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes again. This man, this stranger, was praying for her survival, for her children. When her own family had left her to die, the land began to change subtly as they traveled. The barren rocks giving way to scattered vegetation, scrub brush, hardy grasses that somehow survived in this harsh climate. Then, as they crested a low rise, Eliza saw lights below. Warm, flickering firelight visible through the hides of teepees arranged in a rough circle. Dogs barked in the distance, announcing their approach. "My people," Caleb said, pausing to let her take in the sight. "Nona's lodge is there." He pointed to a teepee set slightly apart from the others, marked with symbols Eliza didn't recognize. As they approached the encampment, figures emerged from the teepees, alerted by the dogs. Eliza felt the weight of unseen eyes, heard the murmur of voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Fear clutched at her again. What if they turned her away? What if they saw only an enemy in her pale skin and blue eyes? But Caleb continued forward, his pace unhurried, his bearing dignified. He called out in his native tongue, a brief explanation that caused the onlookers to fall back, making way for their passage. Before the medicine woman's lodge, Caleb finally stopped. He spoke quietly to someone just inside the entrance, and moments later, an elderly woman emerged. Her face was deeply lined, her hair white as the snow on the mountain peaks, but she moved with the surety of someone half her age. She took in the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. Caleb with the twins in their sling, Eliza swaying atop the horse, barely conscious. "Bring her inside," the old woman said, in perfect English, startling Eliza. "Quickly now." Hands reached up to help her dismount, and the world tilted dangerously as her feet touched the ground. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was Caleb carefully unwrapping the twins from their sling, his large hands impossibly gentle against their tiny forms. "They are beautiful," the old woman was saying, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "Strong spirits in such small bodies." Then darkness claimed her, and Eliza knew nothing more. Eliza woke to unfamiliar sounds, the soft crackle of a fire, the distant laughter of children, the rhythmic scrape of something being ground in a mortar. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This was not the Hartwell estate. Certainly not her childhood home in Pennsylvania, and definitely not that broken wagon on the frozen mountain. The air smelled of smoke and herbs and something earthy she couldn't identify. She lay on a bed of soft furs, a woven blanket of intricate geometric patterns draped over her. The walls around her were hide stretched over wooden poles that met at a central point high above, where daylight filtered through an opening. A teepee. She was in a Cherokee lodge. Memory rushed back like a flash flood. The birth, the blood, the twins, the man on horseback who had appeared like something out of a fever dream. "My babies," she gasped, trying to sit up. Pain lanced through her abdomen, forcing her back down with a moan. "Be still," came a voice from nearby. The elderly woman from the night before moved into her line of sight. Up close, her face was a map of deep lines, each one etched by time and experience. But her dark eyes were clear and sharp, missing nothing. "Your sons are safe," the woman continued in that same perfect English. "You nearly died. Drink this." She held out a small clay cup. The liquid inside was dark and smelled bitter. Eliza hesitated only briefly before drinking. It tasted like willow bark and something else, something that made her tongue tingle. But almost immediately, the pain in her belly began to ease. "My sons," Eliza repeated, her voice steadier now. "Where are they?" The old woman moved aside, revealing a cradle board near the fire. Two tiny bundles swaddled in soft rabbit fur. Eliza could see their small faces, peaceful in sleep. "They are strong, like their mother," the woman said, settling beside the fire. She began adding herbs to a pot of simmering water. "You were fortunate. Another hour and you would have bled into the earth, leaving these little ones alone in a hard world." "You saved us," Eliza whispered. "Caleb brought you. I merely used what knowledge the spirits have given me." The old woman's hands continued their work, nimble despite their age. "I am Nona Ravenfeather. You may call me Nona. I'm Eliza. Eliza May Hartwell." She paused. "Or I was. I don't know what I am now." Nona's expression softened slightly. "You are a mother. That is what matters." A soft cry rose from one of the bundled infants. Nona moved to the cradle board with practiced ease, lifting the child. "This one, the second-born. He has hunger." She brought the baby to Eliza, who awkwardly tried to position herself. Her body felt foreign, strange, like it belonged to someone else. Nona helped, adjusting pillows and showing her how to hold the infant. "You have not done this before," Nona observed. Not a question. Eliza shook her head. "My mother was a midwife. She taught me a little. But doing it alone, in the cold, nothing prepares you for that." "All new life requires guidance," Nona said, her voice softening. "The buffalo cow does not question how to care for her calf. Neither should you question your body's wisdom." As if to prove her point, the baby latched successfully, his tiny hands kneading reflexively. Eliza felt a rush of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. Love and fear intertwined. Responsibility heavier than any burden she had ever carried. Over the next 3 days, Eliza recovered slowly under Nona's care. The old woman brought her bitter teas that stopped the bleeding and gave her strength. A young girl named Kimala, Nona's granddaughter, taught her how to make cloth wrappings for the babies from rabbit fur, how to recognize the signs of hunger versus discomfort, how to survive in this new world that was nothing like the one she had known. Caleb came and went, bringing fresh meat from his hunts, checking on her progress with those careful, assessing eyes. He spoke little, but Eliza found herself watching him when he was near. The way he moved with such economy of motion, the way his hands, large and rough, could be so gentle when he held the babies, the way he listened more than he spoke, as if words were currency to be spent wisely. On the third evening, as Eliza sat outside the lodge for the first time, watching the sun set over the mountains, Caleb joined her. He didn't speak at first, just sat on a fallen log, his rifle resting across his knees. In the valley below, children played while women prepared the evening meal. It looked peaceful, normal, as if the world wasn't slowly being taken from these people. "Why did you save me?" Eliza asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "We, white people, have done terrible things to your people." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the distant peaks. "Hatred does not bring anyone back," he said at last. "But saving a life, perhaps it balances what has been lost." Eliza thought about this, about the wife he had mentioned, the child who never drew breath. "I'm sorry," she said, "about your wife, your baby." "Sorry does not change the past," Caleb replied, but his tone wasn't harsh, just factual. "But perhaps it changes the future. You are alive. Your sons are alive. That is enough." The moment was interrupted by running footsteps. Sola, a young warrior Eliza had seen around the camp, came racing toward them. He was breathing hard, his face tight with urgency. "Caleb," he called out in English, for Eliza's benefit. "White men in town, asking about widow with yellow hair." Caleb stood slowly, his hand moving to his rifle. "How many?" "Two. One with scar on face, one with red hair." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "Garrett Knox and Pike Morrison," she whispered. "They've come for me." Caleb looked at her, then at the lodge where the twins slept. His jaw tightened. "They will not have you." Within the hour, Chief Moitoy had called an emergency council. The old chief sat in the center of the gathering, his weathered face grave as he listened to the reports. Around him sat the warriors and elders, including Caleb and Nona. Eliza had been brought as well, at Caleb's insistence. "If we hide the white woman, the soldiers will come," one of the older warriors said, his voice hard. "They will use it as excuse to attack us, to take our land." "We should give her to them," another voice called out. "We do not die for outsiders." Caleb rose to his feet, and the murmuring stopped. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "She and the children are under my protection. Anyone who touches them goes through me first." Chief Moitoy studied Caleb for a long moment. "You would risk the entire village for one white woman?" "I would risk anything for what is right," Caleb replied. "Is that not what you taught us, grandfather?" The chief's expression softened slightly at the term of respect. But before he could respond, Eliza stood. Every eye in the gathering turned to her. She felt their weight, their suspicion, their fear. But she also felt the weight of her sleeping sons back in Nona's lodge, and that gave her strength. "I don't want to bring danger to you," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "But I know things about Silas Hartwell. Secrets. If we can get proof, we can destroy him." Chief Moitoy leaned forward slightly. "What kind of secrets?" "My husband, before he died, he told me that Silas keeps a ledger, a book where he records all the bribes he's paid. Judges, politicians, military officers, everyone he's bought. It's in a safe in his office." "And how does this help us?" the chief asked. "Because," Eliza said, her mind racing, "if we expose him, he loses everything, his power, his influence, his ability to take your land." Caleb was watching her with new interest. "You know how to get this book?" "I know the house. I know his habits. And," she paused, gathering courage, "I know someone who might help. Ruth Hartwell, Daniel's stepmother. She hates Silas as much as I do." The council erupted in discussion. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. Chief Moitoy raised his hand for silence. "This is dangerous," he said. "If you fail, if you are caught, we cannot help you." "I know," Eliza replied. "But doing nothing is also dangerous. Silas won't stop. He'll keep taking and taking until there's nothing left." The chief looked at Caleb. "You support this plan?" "Yes," Caleb said without hesitation. "Then so be it," Moitoy decided. "But you have 3 days. After that, we move the village higher into the mountains, whether you succeed or not." The next morning, Caleb began teaching Eliza to shoot. They went to a small clearing away from the village, where he set up targets on tree stumps. The pistol felt heavy and foreign in her hand. "Hold it like this," Caleb said, standing behind her, his large hands guiding hers. "Breathe steady. Aim. Squeeze. Don't pull." The first shot made her jump, the recoil jerking her arms up. The bullet went wide, hitting nothing but air. "Again," Caleb said patiently. By the third attempt, she hit the target. Not the center, but close enough. Caleb's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "You learn fast," he observed. That afternoon, Nona performed a naming ceremony for the twins. She held each baby up to the sun, speaking words in Cherokee that Eliza didn't understand, but felt in her bones. Ancient words. Sacred words. "The firstborn," Nona said, her voice carrying across the gathered villagers, "shall be called Waya Unega, White Wolf, one who leads his brother through dark times." She held up the second baby, smaller and more delicate than his twin. "The second-born shall be called Saloli Nevada, Flying Squirrel, small but brave, quick to learn, blessed with wisdom beyond his size." Eliza felt tears streaming down her face. These names, they weren't the names she had chosen, but they felt right. Like her sons belonged to something larger than just her, larger than the Hartwell name and all its poisoned legacy. "Thank you," she whispered to Nona afterward. The old woman touched her cheek gently. "They will walk between two worlds, these children. The names will protect them." On the fourth night, Caleb and Eliza set out for Knoxville. They rode through darkness, two shadows moving silently through the mountain passes. The Hartwell estate loomed on the outskirts of the city, all dark wood and cold windows. Eliza felt her stomach clench as they approached. They left the horse in a copse of trees and crept closer on foot. Eliza led the way to a window she knew well, the one that led to Ruth's chambers. She picked up a small stone and tossed it gently against the glass. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the window opened, and Ruth Hartwell's face appeared. She was 47, but looked older, her hair streaked with gray, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw Eliza, her hand flew to her mouth. "You're alive," Ruth breathed. "Oh God, child, you're alive." "Can we come in?" Eliza asked. Ruth glanced behind her nervously, then nodded. She helped them climb through the window into her room. In the lamplight, Eliza could see bruises on Ruth's wrists, old ones fading to yellow. "I thought—" Ruth couldn't finish the sentence. "Silas tried," Eliza said quietly. "Someone saved me." Ruth's eyes moved to Caleb, who stood silently by the window, watching. "A Cherokee," she said, not with fear or disgust, but with something like wonder. "He's a good man," Eliza said. "Better than any Hartwell." Ruth's laugh was bitter. "That's not hard." She looked at Eliza directly. "What do you need?" "The ledger, from Silas's safe. I know the combination." Ruth went very still. If he finds out I helped you. He already killed Daniel, Eliza said. How long before he hurts you again? How long before he kills you too? Something hardened in Ruth's expression. She had been beautiful once, Eliza thought, before years of fear and pain had carved lines into her face. What do you need me to do? Ruth asked. 20 minutes later, Eliza was in Silas's office. The room smelled of cigar smoke and old leather. His massive oak desk dominated the space, and behind it, set into the wall, was the safe. Her hands shook as she turned the dial. 18, 34, 7. The date of Silas's mother's birth, Daniel had told her. The only person the old man had ever loved. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of papers, deeds, documents, and there, wrapped in oilcloth, was the ledger. Eliza pulled it out, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear. "Looking for something, Mrs. Hartwell?" She spun around. Garrett Knox stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. His scarred face was expressionless, but his eyes glittered with something dark. "I thought you were dead," he said conversationally. "Mr. Hartwell will be very interested to know you survived." "Let me pass," Eliza said, holding the ledger behind her back. "I don't think so." Garrett raised the pistol. "Give me the book, and I'll make it quick." The window shattered. Caleb came through in a shower of glass, moving faster than Eliza would have thought possible for a man his size. He hit Garrett like a battering ram, and both men went down in a tangle of limbs. Eliza ran. She heard Ruth screaming, heard the sounds of fighting behind her, heard a gunshot, but she didn't stop. She clutched the ledger to her chest and ran through the dark house, down the servants' stairs, out the back door, into the night. Pike Morrison was waiting by the horses. His red hair gleamed in the moonlight as he grabbed for her. Eliza didn't think. She pulled the pistol Caleb had given her and fired. The recoil nearly knocked her down, but she saw Pike stagger back, clutching his shoulder. Then Caleb was there, blood on his knuckles, but moving. He grabbed Eliza's hand and they ran together into the darkness, leaving the estate and its horrors behind. They didn't stop running until they were deep in the forest. Eliza collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. Her whole body was shaking. "I shot someone," she said. "I shot Pike Morrison." "To defend yourself," Caleb said, checking her for injuries. "Not a sin." "Is it ever going to stop?" she asked. "This running? This fighting?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he touched her face gently, turning her to look at him. "Not until we make it stop. Together." They rode through the night, returning to Hidden Valley as the sun rose over the mountains. Nona was waiting, and so were the twins, their small cries demanding their mother. Eliza held them close, breathing in their scent, feeling their warmth. Chief Moitoy opened the ledger carefully, studying the pages by firelight. His expression grew darker with each entry he read. "Governor Johnson, $5,000 for favorable treaty terms," he read aloud. "Colonel Thompson, $3,000 to ignore Cherokee complaints. Judge Morrison, $2,000 to dismiss land claims." He looked up. "They are all bought." "Not all," Eliza said. "There's one name not in that book, Marshall Harrison Blackwood in Nashville. Daniel said he was the only honest lawman in Tennessee." "Then we take the book to him," Caleb said. "Nashville is 100 miles, one of the warriors pointed out. 3 days hard riding." "Then I leave at dawn," Caleb replied. But they didn't have 3 days. The messenger arrived that night, a boy from Knoxville, riding hard. He brought a letter, sealed with black wax. Ruth's handwriting. Eliza broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a brief note in Ruth's elegant script, and underneath it, a legal document. "My dearest Eliza," the letter read, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. Silas discovered I helped you. He will make it look like illness or accident, but we both know the truth. Do not grieve for me. I have lived in fear for 20 years. Death is a mercy. I have left you something in my will, legally witnessed by Reverend Gideon. Use it well. Protect those children. They deserve better than the Hartwell name. With love, Ruth." The legal document was a will, properly signed and notarized. It left Ruth's entire estate, 1/3 of the Hartwell empire, to Eliza May Hartwell. Eliza read it twice, unable to comprehend. Then the tears came, hot and bitter. Ruth had given her everything, her life, her fortune, all of it to protect 2 babies she had never met. Caleb knelt beside her, saying nothing, just offering his presence. And somehow, in that moment of grief, Eliza found strength. Ruth hadn't died for nothing. She had given them a weapon. Not just the ledger, but legal standing. Legitimate power. "We use this," Eliza said, her voice hard. "We use everything Ruth gave us. And we make sure Silas Hartwell never hurts anyone again." But even as she spoke, riders were gathering at the Hartwell estate. 50 men, well-armed and angry. And leading them was Silas Hartwell himself, his face twisted with rage, determined to reclaim what he believed was his by right. The war was coming, and this time there would be no running. Dawn broke cold over Hidden Valley, painting the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. But there was no beauty in it for those who understood what the new day would bring. Caleb stood at the edge of the encampment, his rifle across his shoulders, watching the eastern approaches. Behind him, the Cherokee village was already stirring, women banking fires, men checking weapons, children being quietly ushered toward the caves that honeycombed the valley's northern ridge. Everyone knew, when you poked a bear like Silas Hartwell, the bear didn't just growl. It came for blood. Eliza emerged from Nona's lodge, the twins swaddled against her chest in the carrying sling Kimela had made. 3 days ago, she couldn't have imagined walking without help. Now necessity had made her strong, or at least strong enough to stand. The babies were awake, their dark eyes alert, seeming to sense the tension that hung over the camp like smoke. "You should be resting," Nona said, following her out. The old woman's face was lined with worry, though her voice remained steady. "I've rested enough," Eliza replied. She moved to stand beside Caleb, following his gaze toward the mountain passes. "They're coming, aren't they?" "Yes," Caleb said simply. "No point in lying. No point in false comfort." "When?" "Today. Maybe tomorrow. Garrett Knox knows these mountains. He will guide them." Chief Moitoy approached, moving with the careful dignity of a man who had seen too many seasons of trouble. Behind him walked Sola and 3 other young warriors, their faces painted for war. The old chief looked at Eliza for a long moment before speaking. "We have decided," he said. "Caleb will take the ledger to Nashville, to this Marshall Blackwood. The rest of us will prepare to defend the valley or retreat further into the high country, whichever becomes necessary." "How long will it take?" Eliza asked. "To reach Nashville?" 3 days, Caleb answered. "If I ride hard and the weather holds." 3 days. An eternity when men with guns were coming. Eliza felt fear coiling in her stomach, cold and familiar. But underneath it was something else, something harder. Anger. At Silas for his cruelty. at Garrett for his willingness to do evil for money, at a world that let men like that prosper while people like Ruth died for trying to do right. "I'm going with you," she said suddenly. Caleb turned to look at her fully for the first time that morning. "No, too dangerous. The babies need you." "The babies need a future," Eliza countered, "and they won't have one if we hide and hope Silas gives up. He won't. You know that." "She's right," Nona said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at the old woman. "The children will be safe with me. Kimala can feed them goat's milk. But Eliza has the legal papers, Ruth's will. Without her testimony, the ledger alone may not be enough." Chief Moitoy considered this. "The woman has proven her courage, and Caleb trusts her. That is enough for me." He looked at Eliza directly. "But understand, if you are caught, we cannot help you. You will be on your own." "I've been on my own before," Eliza said. "I survived." The decision made, there was no time to waste. Caleb prepared his horse while Eliza said goodbye to her sons. She held each baby close, breathing in their scent, memorizing the feel of their small bodies against hers. Waya Unega, already showing his brother's strength, gripped her finger with surprising force. Saloli Nvida made small, cooing sounds, his dark eyes watching her face. "Mama will come back," she whispered to them. "I promise. I will always come back." Nona took them gently from her arms. "Go," the old woman said. "Do what must be done. I will guard them with my life." Caleb gave Eliza his spare coat and helped her onto the horse. As they prepared to leave, he removed something from around his neck. A leather cord with a single bear's tooth hanging from it. The tooth was old, yellowed with age, carved with symbols Eliza didn't recognize. "This was Ayana's," he said, holding it out. "My wife's. She wore it for protection. Keep it safe for me." Eliza took it with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the gift. This was more than just a talisman. It was trust. It was a promise that he would return to claim it, that they would both return. "I will," she said, slipping it over her head. The tooth settled warm against her chest, as if it still carried the heat of another woman's skin. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, leaving Hidden Valley behind. The journey would take them southeast first, skirting around Knoxville to avoid Silas's men, then due east toward Nashville. Danger a country for a Cherokee man and a white woman traveling together. But less dangerous, Caleb reasoned, than the army that would soon descend on the valley. They had been riding for perhaps 2 hours when they heard it. The sound every traveler dreads, hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast, coming up behind them on the mountain trail. Caleb reined in, his hand moving to his rifle. "Into the trees, now!" They crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the riders were getting closer. Eliza could hear voices now, shouting. Garrett Knox's voice, unmistakable even at a distance. "They went this way! Fresh tracks!" "How did they find us so fast?" Eliza gasped. "Someone talked," Caleb said grimly. "Or they were watching the valley already." They reached a small ravine, steep-sided and choked with fallen timber. Caleb jumped down from the horse, pulling Eliza with him. "We go on foot. The horse will lead them away." He slapped the animal's flank, sending it crashing off through the forest. Then he grabbed Eliza's hand, and they ran, scrambling over rocks, sliding down loose scree, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the pursuit. The gunshots started a few minutes later, sharp cracks echoing off the mountain walls. One bullet whined off a rock near Eliza's head, sending stone chips flying. She felt one cut her cheek, but didn't stop running. They burst out of the trees onto a narrow ledge overlooking a steep drop. The river churned far below, white with spring melt. Behind them, the voices were getting closer. Eliza could see Garrett Knox now, his scarred face twisted with determination. Pike Morrison was with him, his shoulder bandaged where Eliza had shot him. And 3 other men she didn't recognize, all armed, all moving with the practiced efficiency of hunters. "We're trapped," Eliza said, looking at the drop. "There's nowhere to go." Caleb was studying the cliff face with those careful eyes. "There," he said, pointing. "A path. Very narrow, very dangerous. But it leads down to the river. We'll never make it before they catch us." "No," Caleb agreed, "but I can slow them." He pulled Eliza close, his hands on her shoulders, his face intense. "Listen to me. You take the path. Get to the river. Follow it east. 3 miles downstream, there's a settlement. Whiskey Creek. Ask for Reverend Gideon. Tell him Caleb Thornwood sent you. He will help." "What about you?" But Eliza already knew the answer, could see it in his eyes. "I will hold them here," Caleb said. "Give you time." "No," Eliza said fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." "You must." He pulled the ledger from his coat and pressed it into her hands. "This is more important than one man. This is justice. For Daniel, for Ruth, for all the people Silas has hurt." Garrett's voice rang out across the ravine. "Give up, Thornwood. We got you surrounded." Caleb didn't even turn around. He was looking at Eliza, really looking at her, as if memorizing her face. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I will find you. I promise." Then he kissed her, quick and hard, a kiss that tasted of desperation and hope and goodbye. Before Eliza could respond, could say anything, he turned and fired his rifle. The shot echoed like thunder, and she heard someone scream. "Go!" Caleb shouted. "Now!" Eliza went. She didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at her to stay, to fight beside him. But she understood. The ledger had to reach Nashville. Ruth had died for it. Caleb was risking his life for it. She couldn't let that sacrifice be for nothing. The path down the cliff was barely a path at all, more like a series of hand and footholds that required absolute faith and no time to think about the long fall waiting if she slipped. Behind her, she could hear gunfire, shouts, the sounds of men fighting. She made herself focus on the rock in front of her hands, the narrow ledge beneath her feet, the next step and the next. She was halfway down when she heard Sola's war cry. The young warrior had followed them, she realized. He and the others hadn't abandoned Caleb. Relief and terror washed through her in equal measure. Caleb wouldn't die alone. But more people she cared about were in danger. The bottom of the cliff came suddenly. Eliza's feet hit solid ground and she stumbled, nearly falling into the rushing water. The river was cold enough to hurt, swollen with snowmelt from the high peaks. She waded in up to her knees, letting the current help carry her eastward, away from the gunfire that still echoed from above. 3 miles, Caleb had said. 3 miles to Whiskey Creek. She started walking. The settlement appeared through the trees like something from a dream. A dozen rough buildings clustered around a bend in the river. A general store, a blacksmith, a small church with a cross on top. Eliza stumbled toward it, her legs shaking with exhaustion, her dress soaked and torn. People stared as she passed. A white woman, alone, looking like she'd fought her way through hell itself, which, Eliza supposed, wasn't far from the truth. The church door was open. Inside, a man was sweeping the floor. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and kind eyes. He wore simple black clothes and a wooden cross around his neck. "Reverend Gideon?" Eliza asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The man turned, taking in her appearance with concern. "Yes, child. What's happened to you?" "Caleb Thornwood sent me," she said. "He said you would help." Gideon's expression changed immediately. "Caleb? Where is he?" "Fighting. On the mountain. Garrett Knox and others. They're trying to kill us." "Come," Gideon said, dropping the broom. "Quickly. You're not safe in the open." He led her to a small room behind the church, barely more than a closet. "Stay here," he said. "I'll get supplies, food, dry clothes, then you can tell me everything." He returned within minutes, bringing bread, cheese, a blanket, and a simple dress that must have belonged to his wife. Eliza changed quickly, wrapping the wet ledger carefully in the blanket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the buttons. "Now," Gideon said when she was settled, "tell me what's happening." Eliza told him everything, about Silas and the twins, about being left to die, about Caleb and the Cherokee village, about Ruth's death and the ledger that could bring down one of the most powerful men in Tennessee. Gideon listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail. "I knew Ruth Hartwell," he said when she finished. "Good woman, trapped in a bad situation. I witnessed her will because she asked me to, told me she needed to do one right thing before she died." "Then you'll help me get to Nashville?" Eliza asked. "To Marshal Blackwood?" "I'll do better than that," Gideon said. "I'll take you there myself. I have business with the marshal anyway. Been collecting evidence about Silas Hartwell's coal operations for months. Miners dying. Safety violations ignored. If your ledger proves he's been paying off officials, it'll be enough to put him away for life." Hope flared in Eliza's chest. "When can we leave?" "At first light," Gideon replied. "The roads are dangerous at night, but I'll keep watch. You rest. You look like you haven't slept in days." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to demand they leave immediately, but her body was betraying her, exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. "Caleb," she murmured, "I need to know if he's—" "I'll send someone to check," Gideon promised. "Try to sleep." She did sleep, though her dreams were dark and troubled. She dreamed of gunfire and falling, of Caleb's face as he kissed her goodbye, of her babies crying, reaching for her with small hands she couldn't quite grasp. She woke to shouting. It was still dark outside, the world lit only by starlight. Gideon was arguing with someone at the church door. "I don't care what Hartwell's paying you," the Reverend was saying, his voice hard. "You're not coming in here." "We tracked her here," a familiar voice replied. "Garrett Knox. We know she's inside. Make this easy on yourself, preacher. Give her up." Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. She looked around the small room desperately. There was a window, narrow but possibly wide enough for her to squeeze through. She grabbed the wrapped ledger and scrambled toward it. The window stuck, old wood swollen with moisture. She could hear boots on the church floor now. Gideon still arguing, trying to buy her time. She pulled harder, putting all her weight into it. The window gave way with a crack that sounded impossibly loud. Eliza tumbled through into the night air, landing hard on her shoulder. Pain shot through her arm, but she ignored it, scrambling to her feet. "She's running!" someone shouted. Eliza ran. Through the dark streets of Whiskey Creek, past the blacksmith and the general store, toward the river. Behind her she could hear pursuit, heavy footsteps, Garrett's voice cursing. She splashed into the river, the cold water a shock that nearly stopped her heart. But it would hide her trail. She pushed deeper, letting the current help carry her downstream. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. A shot rang out. The bullet kicked up water inches from her head. Eliza ducked under, swimming now, the ledger clutched to her chest. When she surfaced, gasping, she was around a bend, out of sight. She crawled onto the far bank, shivering violently, and kept moving. She walked through the night, following the river, following the stars. As dawn broke, she saw riders approaching.
For a moment, terror seized her. Then she recognized the lead horse and the man riding it. Caleb. Alive, battered and bloody, but alive. Sola rode beside him, along with 2 other Cherokee warriors. "Eliza," Caleb said, sliding down from his horse. His face was cut, his left arm wrapped in makeshift bandages, but his eyes were warm with relief. "You made it." "You're alive," she said stupidly, unable to believe it. "Hard to kill," he replied with the ghost of a smile. Then his expression sobered. "Pike Morrison is dead. Garrett escaped. He knows you're heading to Nashville." "Then we ride fast," Eliza said. "We have the ledger. Reverend Gideon was going to help, but—" She explained what had happened in Whiskey Creek. Caleb listened, his jaw tightening. "Gideon is a good man. He will be all right. But we cannot wait for him." He helped her onto his horse, settling her in front of him. "Hold tight. We have 2 days of hard riding ahead." They rode through country that grew less wild and more settled as they approached Nashville. Farms appeared along the roads, small towns, signs of civilization that felt alien after days in the mountains. People stared at them as they passed. A Cherokee man and a white woman, both looking like they barely survived a war, which, Eliza supposed, they had. Nashville appeared on the horizon as the sun set on their second day of travel. A real city, with brick buildings and paved streets, and more people than Eliza had seen in weeks. The federal courthouse stood at the city's center, an imposing structure of white stone that seemed to glow in the fading light. Marshal Harrison Blackwood's office was on the second floor. A clerk tried to stop them, taking in their disheveled appearance with alarm. "The marshal is very busy," he said. "You'll need to make an appointment." Caleb simply walked past him, pushing open the inner door. The clerk squawked in protest, but they were already inside. Marshal Blackwood looked up from his desk with annoyance that quickly shifted to curiosity. He was in his mid-50s, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. His office was neat, organized, the desk covered with careful stacks of papers. "Marshal Blackwood," Eliza said, "my name is Eliza Hartwell. I have evidence of massive corruption, bribery of state officials, murder, theft of Cherokee lands, all tied to one man, Silas Hartwell." Blackwood studied them for a long moment. Then he gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Sit. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." They talked for hours, Eliza and Caleb taking turns, filling in the pieces of the story. Blackwood listened, making notes, asking sharp questions. When Eliza finally unwrapped the ledger and placed it on his desk, the marshal's eyes widened. He opened it carefully, scanning the pages. His expression grew darker with each entry. "Sweet, merciful God," he breathed. "Governor Johnson, Colonel Thompson, Judge Morrison. He's bought half the territorial government." "Can you arrest him?" Eliza asked. "Can I?" Blackwood looked up, and for the first time since they'd entered, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Mrs. Hartwell, with this evidence, I can destroy him. But I need you to testify, both of you. Can you do that?" "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Then I'll issue warrants immediately," Blackwood said, standing, "for Silas Hartwell, Garrett Knox, and anyone else involved in this conspiracy." He paused.
But you should know, this won't be quick or easy. These men have power, resources. They'll fight back." "Let them fight," Eliza said. "We've come too far to stop now." Blackwood nodded with something like respect. "Very well. I'll have deputies escort you to a safe house. You'll stay there until the trial." He looked at Caleb. "You too, Thornwood. You're a witness, and likely a target." As they left the courthouse, escorted by 2 armed deputies, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close to it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, justice was possible. That Ruth's death and Daniel's death and all the pain and fear might actually mean something. They were halfway to the safe house when the deputies' horses suddenly reared. Men emerged from the shadows, guns drawn, and at their center, looking older and somehow smaller than Eliza remembered, stood Silas Hartwell himself. "Did you really think," the old man said, his voice shaking with rage, "that I would let you destroy everything I've built?" The street erupted into chaos. One of the deputies went for his gun, but never cleared leather. A shot rang out, and he crumpled to the ground. The other deputy's horse bolted, throwing him hard against a hitching post. He didn't get up. Caleb moved like lightning, pulling Eliza from her horse and behind a water trough as bullets started flying. Wood splintered above their heads. Eliza could hear men shouting, horses screaming, the terrible percussion of gunfire echoing off the brick buildings. "How many?" she gasped, clutching the wrapped ledger to her chest. Caleb risked a quick look over the trough. 8, maybe 10. Too many. Silas Hartwell's voice cut through the gunfire. "Stop shooting, you fools! I want them alive. The ledger is no good if she's dead and can't testify it's a forgery." The shooting ceased. In the sudden silence, Eliza could hear her own ragged breathing, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silas stepped into view, flanked by Garrett Knox and several men she didn't recognize. Hard men with cold eyes. Hired guns, not local thugs. "Eliza," Silas said, his voice almost gentle, almost fatherly. It made her skin crawl. "This has gone far enough. Your family, Daniel's widow, come home. We can forget all this unpleasantness." "You left me to die," Eliza said, standing slowly, keeping the trough between herself and the guns. "You murdered Daniel. You murdered Ruth. You're not my family." "Daniel was weak," Silas said, and there was genuine grief in his voice now, strange and terrible to hear. "He would have destroyed everything I built. The Hartwell name means something in this state. It means power, respect. I couldn't let sentiment ruin that." "It means corruption," Eliza countered. "It means blood money and broken promises. And after today, it will mean nothing at all." Silas's expression hardened. "Give me the ledger. Last chance." "No." The old man nodded to Garrett. "Take it from her." Garrett started forward, his scarred face set in grim determination. Caleb rose from behind the trough, rifle aimed steady at the foreman's chest. "One more step," Caleb said quietly. For a frozen moment, no one moved. Then the street exploded with new sound. More gunfire, but this time from behind Silas's men. They scattered, returning fire, confused about where the attack was coming from. Through the smoke and chaos, Eliza saw Marshal Blackwood with a dozen federal deputies, all armed with rifles, all shooting with the practiced precision of lawmen who knew their business. Silas's hired guns were tough, but they weren't trained. They weren't ready for a real fight. "Federal Marshal!" Blackwood's voice boomed. "Throw down your weapons. You're all under arrest." 3 of Silas's men did exactly that, hands going up fast. The others tried to fight. It was over in less than a minute. bodies on the street, wounded men moaning, and Silas Hartwell on his knees, Blackwood's pistol pressed against his temple. "You're finished," the marshal said. "Every crime, every bribe, every murder, it ends now." But Garrett Knox had vanished in the confusion. Eliza saw him slip away down an alley, moving with the practiced ease of a man who knew how to disappear. Before she could shout a warning, he was gone. "He's going back to Hidden Valley," Caleb said, voicing her fear. "To the village. He knows where the twins are." Eliza felt ice flood her veins. Her babies, Waya and Saloli, defenseless with Nona and the others, and Garrett Knox heading back there with God knew how many men, with nothing left to lose and every reason to take revenge. She turned to Blackwood. "We have to go. Now. My children are in danger." The marshal looked torn. "I need you both here, to testify, to make sure these charges stick." "The ledger has everything you need," Eliza said desperately. "Names, dates, amounts. It's all there. But if I don't get back to my sons—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Blackwood studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Go. I'll hold Hartwell here. But you come back. You hear me? Both of you. I'm not letting these bastards wriggle free on a technicality." "We'll come back," Caleb promised. "After we protect our people." Our people. The words hit Eliza with unexpected force. Not the Cherokee, not the whites. Our people. The ones who had taken her in when she had nothing. The ones who had saved her children. The ones who had become, against all odds, her family. They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. Every mile felt like 10, every hour like a week. Eliza kept seeing her babies' faces, kept hearing their cries, kept imagining Garrett Knox's scarred face as he took his revenge on 2 helpless infants who had done nothing but be born to the wrong mother. Dawn found them in the foothills, the terrain growing rougher and more familiar. They were perhaps 10 miles from Hidden Valley when they met the refugees. Cherokee families streaming down from the high country, carrying what they could, children crying, old people struggling to keep pace. Caleb stopped the first group they encountered. "What happened?" An old man Eliza recognized from the village council spoke, his weathered face tight with controlled rage. "Soldiers came. Colonel Thompson with 50 men. They said we had 1 day to leave, that the land was forfeit. They burned 3 lodges to make their point." "The medicine woman?" Caleb asked. "Nona Ravenfeather? The white woman's children?" "Safe, last we saw," the old man replied. "Nona took them deep into the caves with the other young ones. But there was a white man with the soldiers. Scar on his face. He was asking about babies, offering gold to anyone who would tell him where they were hidden." Garrett. Of course he had gone straight to the military, had used the situation to his advantage. Eliza felt rage and fear warring in her chest, making it hard to breathe. "We have to get to those caves," she said to Caleb. "I know a back way," he replied, "but it's dangerous, steep climbing." "I don't care." They left the main trail, following deer paths and rockfall, working their way up the mountain's flank. Below them, Eliza could see smoke rising from Hidden Valley. Not the cook fires of daily life, but thick black smoke that spoke of destruction. Her heart ached for Chief Moitoy, for Camilla, for all the people who had shown her kindness when she had no right to expect it. The cave entrance was hidden behind a waterfall, accessible only by a narrow ledge slick with spray. Caleb went first, testing each foothold, then reached back to help Eliza across. The roar of the falling water made speech impossible. They had to trust touch, trust each other, moving by faith through the blinding mist. The cave beyond was vast, stretching back into darkness. But there was light deeper in, the flicker of small fires, and voices. Cherokee voices, speaking in urgent whispers. "Nona," Caleb called out. "It's me. I'm bringing Eliza." Movement in the shadows. Then Nona appeared, looking older than Eliza had ever seen her, carrying 2 bundles wrapped in rabbit fur. The twins. Alive. Safe. Eliza ran to them, taking both babies in her arms, tears streaming down her face. They were awake, fussy, but unharmed. Waya reached for her face with small fingers. Saloli made the small cooing sounds she had come to recognize as his version of happiness. "They are well," Nona said. "Hungry, tired, but well." The old woman's face was grave. "The village is gone. The soldiers burned everything. Chief Moitoy tried to negotiate, but the white colonel would not listen." "Colonel Thompson," Caleb said, his voice hard. "I know him. Greedy man. Silas bought him years ago." "There is more," Nona said quietly. "The scarred man, Garrett Knox. He found one of our young warriors, tortured him until he revealed the cave entrance. He is coming, with soldiers. We have perhaps an hour before they arrive." An hour. 60 minutes to decide the fate of everyone hiding in these caves, women, children, elders, all looking to Eliza and Caleb for leadership they hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. But sometimes leadership isn't about deserving it. Sometimes it's just about being there when it's needed. "We can't defend this place," Caleb said, thinking aloud. "The cave has only one entrance. They'd trap us, starve us out." "Then we leave," Eliza said. "We take everyone deeper into the mountains, somewhere even Thompson won't follow." "There is nowhere he won't follow," Nona said softly. "Not anymore. This is not about law or land anymore. This is about revenge. They will hunt us until we are all dead or broken." "Then we make them pay too high a price for the hunt," came a new voice. Tsola stepped out of the shadows, his young face set in hard lines. Behind him stood a dozen Cherokee warriors, all armed, all ready. "We are tired of running, tired of giving ground. Maybe it is time to make a stand." "You'll die," Eliza said bluntly. "Thompson has 50 men, trained soldiers." "We all die eventually," Sola replied. "Better to die fighting than to die running." Caleb looked at his young cousin for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Not today. Today we live. All of us." He turned to Eliza. "You still have that legal paper? Ruth's will?" Eliza nodded, pulling it from her dress where she'd kept it dry. "Why?" "Because Colonel Thompson may not care about Cherokee rights," Caleb said slowly, working through an idea. "But he does care about money. And that paper makes you one of the richest women in Tennessee, rich enough to buy his cooperation, or at least his hesitation." "He's already been bought by Silas," Eliza pointed out. "Silas is in jail in Nashville," Caleb countered. "His power is broken. Thompson knows that, which means he's looking for a new employer, someone who can protect his investment." Understanding dawned on Eliza's face. "You want me to bribe him, to become what I'm fighting against?" "I want you to use every weapon we have," Caleb said, "including that one, at least until Blackwood can get here with federal authority." It went against everything Eliza believed in, everything Ruth had died for. Using money to corrupt justice, to buy safety. But as she looked at the twins in her arms, at the frightened faces of the Cherokee families huddled in the cave, she understood that principles were a luxury for people who weren't responsible for lives. "All right," she said. "I'll talk to him. But you stay here, hidden. If this goes wrong, we fight," Sola said firmly. The other warriors nodded agreement. Eliza handed the twins to Nona with a kiss on each small forehead. Then she and Caleb made their way back through the cave, back across the treacherous ledge behind the waterfall, back to the world of soldiers and politics and compromise. They found Colonel Thompson exactly where the refugees said he would be, in the valley below, supervising the methodical destruction of what remained of the Cherokee village. He was a florid man in his 50s, with a thick mustache and the bearing of someone who had grown comfortable with authority. He watched the burning with the detached interest of a man burning anthills, not homes. Garrett Knox stood beside him, gesturing angrily, clearly pushing for more action. "Search the caves," Garrett was saying, as Eliza and Caleb approached. "The brats are up there somewhere." "Mr. Knox," Thompson said in a bored tone, "I've indulged your vendetta this far because Mr. Hartwell paid me well. But Silas Hartwell is currently in federal custody, which means his money is frozen, which means I have no particular reason to care about your personal grievances." Garrett grabbed the colonel's arm. "We had a deal." Thompson shook him off with disgust. "We had a transaction."
"The transaction is concluded. My men have done what you've paid for. The savages are routed. That's enough." "Colonel Thompson," Eliza called out, stepping into view. Both men spun around. Garrett's hand dropped to his pistol. Thompson just looked surprised. "Mrs. Hartwell," the colonel said, "I heard you were dead." "I heard that too," Eliza replied. "Turns out we were both misinformed." She walked closer, keeping her hands visible, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "I wonder if we might speak privately, about a business proposition." Thompson's eyes narrowed with interest. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind involving considerable money," Eliza said, "and the kind that doesn't involve burning people out of their homes." "She's lying," Garrett snarled. "She has nothing. Silas cut her off." "Silas did," Eliza agreed, "but Ruth Hartwell didn't." She pulled out the will, unfolding it with deliberate care. "This document, properly witnessed and filed with the county clerk, leaves me 1/3 of the Hartwell estate. That includes mineral rights to the largest coal deposits in Tennessee. I imagine that's worth quite a lot to the right buyer." Thompson took the paper, reading it carefully. His expression shifted from skepticism to calculation. "Even if this is legitimate, Silas's assets are tied up in legal proceedings. You couldn't access them for months." "True," Eliza acknowledged, "but I could promise them, to someone who helped me keep those assets safe. Someone who made sure the Cherokee people on this land were treated fairly and lawfully. Someone who might be looking for a new patron now that his old one is going to prison." The silence stretched out. Garrett was practically vibrating with rage. Thompson continued to study the document, his merchant's mind clearly working through the angles. "What exactly are you proposing?" the colonel asked finally. "Withdraw your men," Eliza said. "Allow the Cherokee to return to their homes. Use your influence to ensure they're treated according to the treaties they signed, not the whims of corrupt politicians. Do this, and when the estate is settled, you receive a commission, a generous one." "How generous?" 10% of my share," Eliza said. It was an enormous sum, enough to make a colonel wealthy for life. "She's buying you," Garrett shouted. "Same as Silas did. You're just changing masters." "Mr. Knox," Thompson said quietly, "has it occurred to you that you have no standing here whatsoever? You're a wanted man.
There are federal warrants out for your arrest on charges of attempted murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The only reason you're not in irons right now is because I haven't gotten around to arresting you yet." Garrett's face went white. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" Thompson gestured to two of his soldiers. "Corporal, please escort Mr. Knox to the stockade. He can wait there until Marshal Blackwood arrives to collect him." As the soldiers moved toward Garrett, the foreman's hand dropped to his pistol. "Stay back," he snarled. "Don't be foolish," Thompson said. But Garrett Knox had spent his entire life being Silas Hartwell's loyal dog. And now, with his master caged and his purpose gone, he had nothing left but rage. He drew his pistol, swinging it toward Eliza. Caleb's rifle shot rang out before Garrett could fire. The foreman stumbled backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. He looked down at it in surprise, then up at Caleb, then crumpled to the ground. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thompson knelt beside Garrett, checking for a pulse. He found none. "Well," the colonel said, standing and brushing dirt from his knees, "that simplifies matters." He looked at Eliza directly. "I accept your proposition, Mrs. Hartwell. My men will withdraw. The Cherokee may return, and we'll speak no more of this unpleasantness." "Thank you," Eliza said, though the words tasted like ash. She had just bought a man's cooperation with the same kind of money that had caused all this suffering in the first place. Ruth would understand, she told herself. Ruth would know that sometimes you fight corruption with its own weapons. But she still felt dirty. Thompson gave orders. Within an hour, the soldiers were pulling back, forming up for the march back to their fort. The refugees began trickling back to the valley, surveying the damage, beginning the hard work of rebuilding. Chief Moytoy found Eliza as the sun set, painting the ruined village in shades of orange and red. The old chief looked tired, worn down by years of fighting losing battles. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. "I do not fault you for it." "I feel like I betrayed everything," Eliza admitted. "You kept our people alive," Moytoy replied. "That is not betrayal. That is wisdom." He paused, looking out over the valley. "We will rebuild. We always do. But I wonder, how many more times before there is nothing left to rebuild?" Eliza had no answer for that. She could only hold her children close and hope that the world they grew up in would be kinder than this one. As darkness fell, Caleb found her sitting alone by the ruined remains of Nona's lodge. He sat beside her without speaking, offering his presence as comfort. "Is it over?" Eliza asked, finally. "No," Caleb said honestly. "Thompson can be bought again by someone with more money. The government will keep pushing. The coal companies will keep coming. This is just a pause, a breath, not an ending." "Then what do we do?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he took her hand, his rough fingers intertwining with hers. "We keep fighting. We keep surviving. And we teach your sons to do the same." Your sons. Not the twins. Your sons. Acknowledging their bond to her, but also the distance between them and him. The reminder that Caleb was not their father, would never be their father, no matter how much he cared for them. "Our sons," Eliza corrected gently, "if you'll have us." Caleb turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll stay," Eliza said. "Help me raise them. Help me build something better than what we're tearing down. I know it's not. I know we're not." "I will stay," Caleb said simply, "for as long as you want me." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a proposal of marriage. It was something more honest than that. A promise between two people who had survived hell together and come out the other side changed. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the valley, a child laughed. Life, insisting on itself despite everything. Hope, refusing to die. Tomorrow they would go back to Nashville, would testify against Silas Hartwell, would see justice done, or at least something approximating it. But tonight, they simply sat together in the ruins and breathed and lived. And for now, that was enough. The Nashville courthouse stood like a temple to justice, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. But inside, justice moved slowly, grinding through procedure and precedent with the patience of stone wearing away under water. 3 weeks had passed since Eliza and Caleb returned to testify. 3 weeks of lawyers and depositions and endless questions. 3 weeks of living in the federal safe house while Marshall Blackwood built his case against Silas Hartwell. The twins had grown in that time. Wyatt was already showing signs of his brother's strength, gripping fingers with surprising force, his dark eyes alert and watchful. Saloli remained smaller, more delicate, but there was an intelligence in his gaze that reminded Eliza of Daniel, of the man who had tried to do right and died for it. Nona had come to Nashville with them, refusing to let Eliza face this alone. The old woman sat now in the gallery, her weathered face serene, despite the hostile stares from those who saw only a savage in their civilized courtroom. Sola was there too, standing against the back wall, his hand resting on the knife at his belt, as if daring anyone to object to his presence. The prosecution had been methodical. They had called witness after witness. Miners who testified about unsafe conditions, families of men who died in Hartwell's pits, Cherokee elders who spoke through translators about stolen land and broken promises. And through it all, Silas Hartwell sat at the defense table, his white hair immaculate, his face showing nothing but contempt. He had the best lawyers money could buy. They objected to everything, challenged every witness, turned every testimony into an exercise in legal minutiae. But they couldn't challenge the ledger, couldn't explain away those careful entries in Silas's own handwriting, couldn't dispute the dates and amounts that matched exactly with decisions made by the very officials listed. Now it was Eliza's turn. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Abernathy, led her through her testimony with practiced efficiency. How she married Daniel Hartwell. How Daniel discovered his father's corruption. How Daniel died under suspicious circumstances. How she was abandoned on Cumberland Mountain while carrying twins. "And who ordered your abandonment?" Abernathy asked. "Silas Hartwell," Eliza said clearly, looking directly at her father-in-law. "He told Garrett Knox and Pike Morrison to take me far enough that I couldn't find my way back, that the desert would take care of the rest." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge, an elderly man with kind eyes, banged his gavel for quiet. Silas's lead attorney, a man named Pemberton, rose for cross-examination. He was good at his job.
Very good. He walked Eliza through every detail, looking for inconsistencies, for ways to paint her as a vengeful widow with an axe to grind. "Mrs. Hartwell," Pemberton said smoothly, "you claim my client ordered your death, yet here you sit, alive and well. Doesn't that suggest your story is somewhat exaggerated?" "I survived because someone helped me," Eliza replied, "not because Silas showed mercy." "Ah, yes, the Cherokee man." Pemberton's tone dripped with skepticism. "How convenient that this savage appeared exactly when you needed him."
almost as if the entire story were fabricated. Caleb half rose from his seat in the gallery, his face dark with anger. Sola put a hand on his shoulder, holding him back. Eliza forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. "Caleb Thornwood saved my life and the lives of my children," she said. "That's not convenience. That's grace." "Or it's a story," Pemberton countered, "designed to make you sympathetic, to make the jury forget that you stand to inherit a fortune if my client is convicted." "I stand to inherit a fortune regardless," Eliza shot back. "Ruth Hartwell left me her share of the estate. That's already settled. This trial doesn't change my financial situation one bit." Pemberton's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected that answer. "Then why are you here? Why pursue this vendetta against the father of your dead husband?" "Because," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest, "someone has to stand up and say that what he did was wrong, that you can't buy justice, that you can't kill people who get in your way, that your children aren't property to be disposed of when they don't meet your standards." She leaned forward. "Daniel was a good man. Ruth was a good woman. They died because they had the courage to oppose Silas Hartwell. I'm here to make sure they didn't die for nothing." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Pemberton seemed at a loss for words. The judge made a note on his pad, his expression thoughtful. The trial continued through the afternoon. Caleb was called to testify, speaking in his measured way about finding Eliza on the mountain, about the ledger, about everything that followed. The defense tried to discredit him as a biased witness with no standing, but Marshal Blackwood had anticipated that. He produced documentation showing Caleb had served as a scout for the Army during the war, had an honorable discharge, had standing in the community despite being Cherokee. By the time the sun set, both sides had rested their cases. The judge instructed the jury and sent them to deliberate. Everyone knew it would take time, maybe days. Cases this complicated always did. Eliza was gathering her things, preparing to return to the safe house, when a clerk approached Marshal Blackwood with an urgent message. The marshal's face went pale as he read it. "What is it?" Eliza asked, fear already coiling in her stomach. "Silas," Blackwood said grimly. "His lawyers posted bail. Some technicality about the charges not being properly filed. He's being released tonight." "You can't let him go," Caleb said, moving to stand beside Eliza. "He'll run, or worse." "I don't have a choice," Blackwood replied. "The judge signed the order. My hands are tied." But Blackwood didn't know Silas Hartwell the way Eliza did. Didn't understand that the old man would rather burn the world than admit defeat. She saw it in Silas's eyes as he walked past her on his way out of the courthouse, flanked by his lawyers. That cold, calculating look that said this wasn't over, that he had one more card to play. The safe house was a small building on the outskirts of Nashville, protected by 2 federal deputies who rotated shifts. It had been secure enough when Silas was in jail, but with him free, with his resources available again, with nothing left to lose? Eliza didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed holding the twins, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows. Caleb sat in a chair by the door, his rifle across his knees, equally wakeful. "He's coming," Eliza whispered. "I can feel it." "Let him come," Caleb replied. "This time we're ready." The attack came at 3 a.m, not with guns blazing, but with fire. Silent men crept close in the darkness and threw bottles of kerosene against the walls. By the time the first flames caught, they were already gone. The deputies shouted warnings. Caleb kicked open the door, rifle ready, But there was no one to shoot at. Just fire, spreading with terrifying speed across the dry wood walls. Smoke thick enough to choke on. "Out the back!" one deputy yelled. "Move!" Eliza grabbed the twins, wrapping them tight in blankets. Caleb took her arm, guiding her through the smoke toward the rear exit. Behind them, Nona followed, moving with surprising speed for her age. They burst out into the cold night air, gasping and coughing. More men were waiting, at least a dozen, faces hidden behind bandanas, all armed. Not professional soldiers this time. These were different, rougher, the kind of men you hired when you wanted something done and didn't care about the law. One of the deputies went down immediately, shot before he could raise his weapon. The other managed to fire twice before a bullet took him in the shoulder. Then it was just Caleb and Sola, who had materialized from somewhere in the darkness, both firing with deadly accuracy. "Get to the horses," Caleb shouted to Eliza. "Ride! Don't stop!" But there were too many attackers. Eliza ran with the twins, Nona beside her, heading for the small stable behind the house. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet. Someone screamed. The world was smoke and fire and chaos. They reached the stable just as a figure stepped out of the shadows. Silas Hartwell himself, no longer the dignified patriarch from the courtroom. This was something older, something meaner. A man who had built an empire with his bare hands and would kill to keep it. He held a pistol pointed at Eliza's chest. "End of the line," he said quietly. "Give me the children." "Never," Eliza said. "They're Hartwell blood," Silas continued, almost conversationally. "The last of my line, Daniel's sons. They deserve better than being raised by a woman who beds savages." "They deserve better than you," Eliza shot back. "Better than your cruelty, your greed, your poison." Silas's hand tightened on the pistol. "I didn't want this. You forced my hand. If you had just accepted what happened, if you had just died quietly on that mountain, none of this would have been necessary." "Daniel didn't die quietly," Eliza said. "Ruth didn't die quietly, and neither will I." She pulled her own pistol, the one Caleb had given her weeks ago, the one she had practiced with until her hands stopped shaking. She was faster than Silas expected. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. His own shot went wild, burying itself in the stable wall. Silas staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He looked at her with something like respect mixed with hatred. "You're stronger than I thought," he gasped. "Daniel chose better than I gave him credit for." "Daniel chose love," Eliza said, "something you never understood." Before Silas could respond, Marshal Blackwood appeared with more federal deputies. They had been watching, Eliza realized, waiting to see what Silas would do, gathering evidence for the inevitable appeals. "Silas Hartwell," Blackwood said, "you're under arrest. Again. But this time for arson, attempted murder, and violating the terms of your bail." He looked at the hired guns who were being rounded up by his men. "And this time, there won't be any bail, any technicalities. You'll stay in custody until the jury delivers their verdict." The trial resumed 2 days later. The jury had already been deliberating when news of the attack reached them. If anything, it seemed to harden their resolve. They returned after only 6 hours with their verdict. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced Silas Hartwell to 25 years in federal prison. With remission for good behavior, he might see freedom again in his 80s. More likely, he would die behind bars, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption. Eliza felt nothing as the sentence was read. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness and the desire to go home, wherever home was now. Marshal Blackwood found her outside the courthouse as she prepared to leave. "You did the right thing," he said, "coming forward, testifying."
Not everyone would have that courage. "I didn't have a choice," Eliza replied. "Not really." "We always have choices," Blackwood countered. "You chose justice over safety, truth over convenience. That matters." He handed her an envelope. Inside were legal documents, thick and official. "The Hartwell estate has been liquidated per Ruth's will. Your share comes to just under $200,000, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life." $200,000. More money than Eliza had ever imagined. Enough to go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. "What will you do with it?" Blackwood asked. Eliza thought about that. About the Cherokee village, still rebuilding from the fire. About the families who had lost homes. About Chief Moytoy's question. How many more times before there was nothing left to rebuild? "I'm going to buy land," she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. 50,000 acres. In the mountains where the Cherokee live. I'm going to deed it to them. Create a protected territory that can't be taken away by corrupt politicians or greedy coal companies." Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious and probably legally complicated." "Then I'll hire good lawyers," Eliza said. "I can afford them now." The marshal smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "You know, when you first walked into my office, I thought you were just another victim looking for revenge. I was wrong. You're a force of nature, Mrs. Hartwell." "Not Hartwell," Eliza corrected. "Not anymore. That name is dead. I'm taking back my maiden name, Eliza May Carson." "Then good luck to you, Miss Carson," Blackwood said, tipping his hat. "Something tells me you won't need it." As Eliza prepared to leave Nashville, she made one last visit. Reverend Gideon's church in Whiskey Creek stood quiet in the afternoon sun. The Reverend was in the garden, tending vegetables with the same patient care he showed everyone who came to him for help. "Mrs. Thornwood," he said, straightening when he saw her. "Or should I say Miss Carson now?" "Either is fine," Eliza said with a smile. "I came to thank you for everything you did, for trying to protect me that night." Gideon waved away her thanks. "I only did what any Christian should. You're the one who had the courage to see it through." He paused. "I heard about Ruth Hartwell, about her will. She was a good woman who suffered much. I'm glad some good came from her sacrifice." "I'm using part of the inheritance to establish a trust," Eliza said, "for Cherokee education. I'd like you to sit on the board, if you're willing." The Reverend's eyes widened. "I'd be honored." They talked for another hour about the future, about building bridges instead of walls. When Eliza finally left, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Not everyone from her old world had been cruel. Some, like Gideon and Ruth, had tried to do right, even when it cost them dearly. 3 weeks later, Eliza stood in a lawyer's office in Knoxville, signing documents that would change everything. Chief Moytoy was there, along with representatives from the Cherokee Nation. Caleb stood behind her, solid and reassuring. The land transfer was complex, requiring approval from multiple government agencies. But Eliza had learned something in her battles with Silas Hartwell. Money bought access. It bought attention. It bought lawyers who knew how to navigate the system. The land would be held in a trust, managed by a council of Cherokee elders with Eliza as a non-voting advisor. It couldn't be sold or seized, could only be passed down to future generations. A permanent homeland, protected by the very legal system that had tried to destroy it. "Why do you do this?" Chief Moytoy asked as they left the lawyer's office. "You could have kept the money," left us, built a new life far from all this trouble. Because, Eliza said, looking at Caleb, at Nona, at all the people who had saved her when she had nothing. You gave me a life when I should have died. You gave my children a future. This is just paying that debt. There is no debt, Moitoy said firmly. You earned your place among us through blood and courage. You are Cherokee in spirit, if not in blood. That evening, back at Hidden Valley, the village held a ceremony, not for Eliza, though she was honored, but for Nona Ravenfeather, who had grown weaker over the past weeks. The old medicine woman sat wrapped in blankets by the fire, her breathing labored, her eyes already looking towards something the rest of them couldn't see. I am ready, Nona said when Eliza came to sit beside her. I have seen the children safe, have seen justice done. There is nothing left that holds me here.
Please don't leave, Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. I still need you. No, Nona said gently. You think you do. But you are strong now, strong enough to walk your path without me. She touched Eliza's face with a trembling hand. Raise those boys well. Teach them both worlds. They will need that wisdom for what comes. What comes? Eliza asked. What do you see? I see them grown, Nona said, her voice fading. Two men standing at a crossroads. One walks toward the rising sun, one toward the setting sun. But their paths will cross many times, and together they will build bridges between worlds that have been enemies too long. The old woman closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, stopped. And just like that, Nona Ravenfeather, who had saved Eliza's life, who had named her children, who had been grandmother and guide and friend, was gone. They buried her the next day in the traditional way, in a place she had chosen long ago, a hilltop overlooking the valley, where she could see the sunrise and sunset, where the wind sang through the pine trees. Eliza stood at the grave long after the others had left, holding the twins, letting her tears fall. Thank you, she whispered to the earth, for everything. Caleb found her there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, offering the comfort of his presence. What do we do now? Eliza asked finally. We live, Caleb said simply. We raise your sons. We protect this land. We try to make the world a little better than we found it. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had saved her life, who had fought beside her, who had asked for nothing in return. Will you marry me? She asked. Caleb blinked, surprised. Is that a proposal? I think it is, Eliza said, surprised herself. We've been through hell together. We're raising children together. Seems like we should make it official. The Cherokee way or the white way? Caleb asked, with the ghost of a smile. Both, Eliza said. Everything, all of it. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Yes, I will marry you, Eliza Carson. They were wed a month later, in a ceremony that blended both traditions. Reverend Gideon performed the Christian rites in his small church. Then they traveled to Hidden Valley, where Chief Moitoy joined them in the Cherokee way, with sacred fire and ancient words. The twins were there, now 4 months old, watching with solemn eyes as their mother and the man who had become their father, in all but blood, made their promises to each other. Promises to honor and protect, to walk together through whatever came, to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. It wasn't a perfect ending. The world was still broken in too many ways. The Cherokee would still face hardship and injustice. Silas Hartwell had been defeated, but men like him would always exist. The fight would continue.
But standing there with Caleb's hand in hers, with her sons healthy and safe, with a community around her that she could finally call home, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the naive hope of youth that believes everything will work out, but the harder, more resilient hope of someone who has walked through fire and emerged scarred but unbroken. The hope that says tomorrow might be better because we choose to make it so. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. 2 years had passed since the trial that broke Silas Hartwell's empire. 2 years since Eliza had stood in that Nashville courtroom and watched justice, imperfect but real, finally prevail. The world had moved on, as worlds do, grinding forward with relentless indifference to the struggles of individuals. But for Eliza, those 2 years had been everything.
Spring had come again to the Tennessee mountains, painting the valleys in dogwood white and redbud purple. The cabin Eliza and Caleb had built stood at the edge of Hidden Valley, not quite in the Cherokee village, but close enough to be part of it. It was larger than most, with 2 rooms and a real wooden floor, but still simple by the standards of the world Eliza had left behind. She wouldn't have traded it for all the Hartwell mansions in creation. Inside the cabin, chaos reigned in the way it does with small children. Waya Unega, now 2.5 years old, was attempting to climb everything in sight, his fearless nature already showing the warrior spirit Nona had seen in him. Saloli and Vida sat quietly by the fire, stacking wooden blocks with the careful precision that marked him as the thinker of the pair. And in a cradle by the window, 6-month-old Meadow slept peacefully, her tiny hand curled into a fist, oblivious to her brother's noise. Eliza watched them from the doorway, a worn apron over her simple dress, flour dusting her hands from the morning's baking. She had changed in these 2 years. Her skin was browner from the sun. Her hands were calloused from work. Her blonde hair, once carefully pinned, now hung in a simple braid down her back. She looked like a mountain woman, which she supposed she was. But the changes went deeper than appearance. There was a steadiness in her now, a core of strength forged in fire and tested by hardship. The frightened girl who had been abandoned on Cumberland Mountain was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to build something worth surviving for. Caleb entered carrying fresh water from the spring, his shoulders still strong despite the years, his face weathered but peaceful. He set down the buckets and paused to watch the children, a small smile playing at his lips. "Waya is climbing again," Eliza observed. "Like his mother," Caleb replied. "Stubborn, always reaching for what seems impossible." "I learned from the best," Eliza said, kissing his cheek as she passed. "You're the one who climbed down that cliff to save us." "And you're the one who climbed out of hell," Caleb countered, "multiple times." It was an old conversation, comfortable and familiar, the kind married people have when they've learned each other's rhythms so well that words become almost unnecessary. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Chief Moytoy stood there, leaning heavily on a walking stick, his ancient face grave. Behind him stood Reverend Gideon, looking equally serious. "We need to talk," the chief said. "All of us. About the future." They gathered around the table while Camilla, now 18 and promised to marry young Tsola, watched the children. The adults sat in that heavy silence that precedes important news, each waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, Gideon cleared his throat. "There's going to be a conference," he said, "in Nashville, 3 months from now. Representatives from the federal government, the Cherokee Nation, and various business interests. They're calling it the Appalachian Peace Summit. Peace, Moitoy said bitterly. They always call it peace when they mean surrender. Not this time, Gideon countered. At least, not entirely. The government is proposing to create formal, protected territories, legal recognition of Cherokee land rights, in exchange for allowing limited resource extraction under strict guidelines. They want our coal, Caleb said flatly. Our timber. They're just being more polite about stealing it this time. Perhaps, Gideon agreed, but perhaps it's also an opportunity to get something permanent, something that can't be taken away by the next corrupt politician or greedy businessman. And they want Eliza there, Moitoy added, looking at her directly. The woman who defeated Silas Hartwell.
The white woman who gave land to the Cherokee. You've become a symbol, whether you wanted to be or not. Eliza felt the weight of those words settling on her shoulders. She had thought, hoped, that after the trial she could fade into obscurity, raise her children, live quietly. But life, she was learning, rarely let you choose your path. It just kept pushing you forward and dared you to keep walking. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Speak for us," Moitoy said. "Not as Cherokee, you can never be that, but as someone who stands between worlds, someone who understands both sides, someone they might actually listen to." "I'm not a politician," Eliza protested. "I'm just a woman who survived the impossible," Gideon finished, "who turned her suffering into something good, who proved that courage and compassion can still matter in a world that values neither. That's exactly who they need to hear from." Eliza looked at Caleb, seeking his counsel with her eyes. He studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "It's your choice," he said quietly. "I will support whatever you decide. But I think Nona saw this, saw you standing at this crossroads. This is the moment she spoke of before she died." The memory of the old medicine woman's final words came back to Eliza, about bridges between worlds, about her sons growing up to connect divided peoples. But perhaps it wasn't just about them. Perhaps it started with her. "All right," Eliza said. "I'll go. I'll speak. But I'm not making any promises I can't keep. And I'm not betraying anyone for political convenience." "We wouldn't ask you to," Moitoy said. "Just tell the truth. That's all we need." The next 3 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Eliza met with Cherokee elders, learning their stories, understanding their grievances, memorizing the long history of broken treaties and unfulfilled promises. She studied maps and land surveys, educated herself on mineral rights and resource management, transformed herself from a frontier wife into something resembling a legal advocate. Caleb watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're changing again," he observed one evening as she pored over documents by lamplight. "The world keeps changing me," Eliza replied. "I'm just trying to keep up." "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Your old life, the comfort, the certainty?" Eliza set down her papers and really considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes I miss not being afraid, not having to fight for everything. But that life was built on lies and cruelty. This one is real, hard but real, and I wouldn't trade it." The journey to Nashville was easier this time, traveling by proper coach on improved roads. Progress, Eliza thought wryly, the kind that made transportation comfortable while displacing entire peoples. The summit was held in the same courthouse where Silas had been tried.
Eliza couldn't help but feel the weight of history as she climbed those white steps again. She was dressed simply but respectfully in a dark blue dress that Ruth Hartwell's money had bought, but that bore no pretension. Her hair was pinned up in the white fashion, but she wore a small beaded ornament that Kimala had made, a subtle declaration of where her loyalties lay. The conference room was intimidating. Long tables arranged in a square, with government officials on one side, Cherokee representatives on the other, and business interests along the back. At least 50 people, all men except for Eliza, all watching her with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. The moderator, a federal judge named Harrison, who had a reputation for fairness, introduced her. Mrs. Thornwood has unique standing in this matter.
As both a property owner with significant mineral rights and a member of the Cherokee community by marriage and adoption. We've asked her to speak to the possibility of coexistence, of finding a path forward that honors both progress and preservation. Eliza stood, her hands only slightly trembling. She had prepared a speech, written and rewritten it a dozen times. But looking at these faces, these powerful men who held the fate of so many in their hands, she set her notes aside. 2.5 years ago, she began, I was left to die on a mountain. My crime was carrying twins instead of a single heir, being inconvenient to a man who valued power over people. I should have died there. My children should have died. But we didn't, because a Cherokee man named Caleb Thornwood chose mercy over indifference, chose to help someone who had no claim on his compassion except shared humanity. She paused, letting the words settle. That choice changed everything. It saved 3 lives directly, but it also started something larger, a challenge to the idea that we must choose sides, that we must see each other as enemies, that progress requires crushing those who stand in its way. A railroad executive interrupted. With respect, Mrs. Thornwood, sentiment is admirable, but we're discussing practical matters, resource development, economic growth. These require difficult decisions. I'm aware, Eliza said coolly. I'm also aware that my late father-in-law, Silas Hartwell, used exactly that logic to justify murder, bribery, and theft. Progress became an excuse for cruelty. Development became permission to destroy. And in the end, what did it build? An empire that collapsed the moment its corruption was exposed. She turned to address the Cherokee representatives. But I'm also not naive enough to think we can stop change. The world is moving forward, whether we want it to or not. The question isn't whether there will be mines and railroads and towns. The question is whether they'll be built with respect or with brutality. For the next hour, Eliza laid out a proposal she had developed with Chief Moytoy and several progressive lawyers. A system of dual governance for the protected territories. Cherokee councils would have veto power over any development, but couldn't block everything indefinitely. Revenue from responsible resource extraction would fund Cherokee schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and most importantly, the land itself would remain inalienable, protected from seizure or sale. It's not perfect, Eliza concluded. It requires both sides to compromise, to trust each other. And I know trust is in short supply. But the alternative is more violence, more suffering, more children orphaned and communities destroyed. I've seen that path. I've walked it. And I'm telling you, there has to be a better way. The debate that followed was heated. Some officials dismissed the entire proposal as impractical. Some Cherokee leaders argued it didn't go far enough. But others, on both sides, saw the possibility in it. Notably absent from the proceedings was Colonel Thompson,
who had quietly retired to avoid investigation into his dealings with both Silas Hartwell and Eliza herself. Some compromises, Eliza had learned, left stains that never fully washed away. The chance to break the cycle of conflict and betrayal that had defined relations for decades. The summit didn't resolve everything. These things never do. But when it ended 3 days later, there was a framework, a starting point. And most surprisingly, there was a commitment from the federal government to pilot the program in Tennessee, with Eliza's protected territory as the test case. "You did it," Caleb said, as they prepared to leave Nashville. "You actually did it." "We did it," Eliza corrected. "All of us."
Everyone who refused to accept that hate and division were inevitable. On the journey home, Eliza found herself thinking about Waya and Saloli, about the world they would grow up in. It wouldn't be perfect. There would still be prejudice, still be injustice, still be people who saw difference as something to fear rather than celebrate. But maybe, just maybe, it would be a little better, a little kinder. They reached Hidden Valley as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The village had grown since the fire, rebuilt stronger and more permanent. There was even a school now, where Cherokee children learned their language and history alongside reading and arithmetic. Waya and Saloli ran to greet them, their small bodies colliding with Eliza in a tangle of hugs and excited babbling. Meadow was awake in Kimela's arms, her dark eyes bright and alert. "Mama!" Waya shouted in English. Then in Cherokee, "You came back!" "I always come back," Eliza said, holding both boys close. Always. That night, after the children were asleep, Eliza and Caleb walked to the hilltop where Nona was buried. The grave was well tended, marked with stones arranged in the traditional way. Eliza knelt beside it, placing a bundle of spring flowers. "I hope I made you proud," she whispered. "I hope I'm building the bridges you saw." "She would be proud," Caleb said quietly. "As am I." Eliza stood, leaning against her husband, looking out over the valley. Lights flickered in the windows of cabins and lodges. Smoke rose from cook fires. The sounds of evening drifted up to them. Children laughing, adults talking, life continuing in its beautiful, messy complexity. "Do you ever wonder what they'll become?" Eliza asked, thinking of her sons. "Waya and Saloli? What paths they'll choose?" "Every day," Caleb admitted. "Waya has the fire. He'll be a leader of some kind. Warrior or politician, I cannot say. Saloli has the wisdom. He'll be the one who heals, who teaches, who remembers." "And Meadow?" Caleb smiled. "She'll surprise us all. I can feel it." They stood in comfortable silence as night fell completely, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Another answered. The sound of the wild that still persisted despite everything humanity did to tame it. "I've been thinking," Eliza said finally, "about writing it all down. Everything that happened, from the mountain to the trial to the summit. Not for publication, just for them." She gestured toward the cabin where their children slept. "So they'll know where they came from, what we fought for, why it mattered." "A good idea," Caleb agreed. "But include the hard parts, too. Don't make it a fairy tale. They need to understand that justice is messy, that good people sometimes do questionable things for the right reasons, that the world is more complicated than heroes and villains." "I will," Eliza promised. "I'll tell them everything. The fear and the courage, the mistakes and the victories, all of it." 10 years passed, the kind of years that blur together in memory, marked by the milestones of growing children
and the slow accumulation of days well lived. Waya grew tall and strong, already showing signs of the commanding presence he would carry as a man. Saloli remained smaller, more delicate, but his eyes held an intelligence that made adults pause and reconsider their words around him. Meadow at 10 was a force of nature, fearless and curious, equally comfortable in buckskin or calico. The protected territory had survived. Barely. There had been challenges every year, attempts by various interests to undermine the agreement. But each time, Eliza had gone to Nashville, had testified, had reminded people what they had promised. And each time, the territory had held. Other territories had been established following the Tennessee model.
Not many, and not without resistance. But it was a start, a crack in the wall of inevitability that said progress required destruction. Eliza was 40 now, lines appearing at the corners of her eyes, her hands permanently stained from work in the garden and the schoolhouse where she taught reading to Cherokee children. Caleb's hair showed streaks of gray, and he moved a bit slower on cold mornings, old wounds from old fights making themselves known. But they were happy. Against all odds, despite everything they had endured, they had built a life worth living. One spring morning, a letter arrived. The seal was official, the paper expensive. It was from the governor of Tennessee, inviting Eliza to speak at the state capitol about the success of the Protected Territory program. There would be important people there, he wrote, investors and philanthropists who wanted to replicate the model in other states. Another speech, Eliza said, showing Caleb the letter. Another room full of powerful men, deciding the fates of people they've never met. Will you go? Caleb asked. Eliza looked at her children, playing by the creek. Waya was teaching Saloli to fish, while Meadow built elaborate dams from river stones. 3 children who existed because someone had chosen mercy, who were growing up in a world slightly better than the one their mother had known. Yes, she said, I'll go, for them, and for all the children who come after. Because that, Eliza had learned, was what legacy meant. Not monuments or wealth or even justice achieved. Legacy was the incremental bettering of the world, the small acts of courage that accumulated over time into change, so gradual you barely noticed it happening until you looked back and saw how far you'd come. She thought of Daniel sometimes, the husband she had loved and lost. Of Ruth, who had died to give her the means to fight. Of Nona, whose wisdom still guided her in quiet moments. They were gone, but they lived on in every choice Eliza made, every battle she fought, every bridge she tried to build. And someday, when her own time came, she would live on in her children, in the stories they told their children, in the world she had helped shape, imperfect but better, flawed but moving forward. That evening, Eliza sat down to add to the journal she had been keeping for 10 years, the one she would give to Waya, Saloli, and Meadow when they were old enough to understand. She dipped her pen in ink and wrote, "My children, if you are reading this, then I have finished my part of the story. The rest is yours to write. You will face challenges I cannot imagine, make choices I cannot guide you through. But remember this, you come from people who survived the impossible. Your father Daniel, who died trying to expose corruption. Your grandmother Ruth, who gave everything so you could live free. Nona Ravenfeather, who saw your spirits before you even knew yourselves. And Caleb, who taught us all that mercy can be stronger than hate. Who chose courage over comfort. Who believed that one person could make a difference, even when the world insisted otherwise. That blood runs in your veins. That strength lives in your hearts. Use it wisely. Use it well. Build bridges where others build walls. Choose mercy where others choose cruelty. And never forget that you belong to two worlds. Let that be your strength, not your burden. With all my love, your mother, Eliza May Carson Thornwood. She set down the pen and looked out the window at the darkening mountains. Somewhere in a federal prison, Silas Hartwell was dying, his empire in ruins, his name synonymous with everything wrong with unchecked power. Somewhere in Nashville, politicians were debating policies that would affect thousands of lives. Somewhere in these mountains, Cherokee families were building futures on land that finally, legally, belonged to them. And here, in this simple cabin, 3 children slept peacefully, dreaming dreams that would shape the next chapter of a story that was far from over. Eliza smiled. She had been many things in her 40 years: a daughter, a wife, a widow, a mother, a survivor, a fighter, an advocate. But as she sat there in the lamplight, surrounded by the life she had built from ashes and determination, she thought perhaps the most important thing she had been was simply this: present, refusing to give up, refusing to accept that the world couldn't change, refusing to let cruelty and corruption have the last word. And in the end, that refusal had made all the difference. The lamp flickered. Outside, the first stars appeared, and in the distance, barely audible, came the sound of wolves singing to the moon. Not a threat, just a reminder that the wild heart of these mountains still beat, still endured, still sang. Just like her. Just like all of them who had learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to live, had to fight, had to hope, and most of all, had to keep walking forward, one step at a time, toward a dawn that was always just out of reach, but always, always worth pursuing. The end.